All right, folks, welcome to the Summer Readiness Training on Resource Performance Expectations. Appreciate you all taking time. We do this training every year and for a good purpose. We want to make sure we are prepared for these probably increased summer temperatures, but that we are clear on emergency response, communication, operational coordination, so we are ready to meet the demand in the summer. My name is Nathaniel Brown. I'll be leading the training today. With me also are several esteemed members of the ISO staff, and we're here to answer your questions and get you what you need so you're prepared to run your resources during the summer. Just to look at what we'll be talking about, take a look back in time and see what we learned from maybe summer 2024. And I also want to get you our hot off the presses loads assessment for this summer. Hopefully I have some information going into it. We'll highlight most of our time on these operational actions with dispatch operating targets, dispatch operating points, and operating instructions. We'll also take a little detour down battery lane and talk specifically about those kinds of resources. We'll then move on and talk about outage management as well, again, including storage, and then closing up with emergency assistance protocols and communications. If we find our strain on the system, what can we do to reach out to everyone and get everything we need, hopefully in the day ahead time frame, but as we get closer to real time, we want to make sure we are clearly communicating and have every energy bit we need. At the end, I've got plenty of links for you, plenty of not only operating procedures, but lots of other PDFs and other sites you can visit. Just as a reminder, this training is recorded, so you'll be able to revisit or share with others in your team, as well as the slides will be available in a PDF, so you can just go in and click on that link right from the slide. So both of those will be available once this training is over. All right. As usual, with this kind of webinar format, I think the best place to put our questions in the chat. It is the most accessible to everyone, is visible by everyone, so put all your questions in that chat ahead of time, and especially, it gives all of our folks who are in our subject matter expert role, they get a chance to review that question, do a little digging, and hopefully can respond either in line or whenever we pause for questions. If you prefer to ask that question out loud, feel free to raise your hand using the WebEx option down in the meeting controls. And at different points, we'll pause and let you unmute if you prefer to state that question out loud. In the meantime, though, we have everybody muted just to make sure there's no disturbances, and then recording is a clean audio signal. But like I said, chat is absolutely the best. Thank you, Heidi, for putting that in the chat there. And it's the best place to put them, and we'll check in often. Let's go and look back at 2024. I'll just give you some key stats here. Every single year, I appreciate all of you who've been here and come into this training maybe for decades. We do this summer readiness because we obviously want to be prepared. If it's your first time coming to training, welcome. We're glad to have you. I'm going to be presenting all the information at the foundational level so that if it is your first time, this training is meant to be for you. If you have all been here for many years, please do share what you know as well. Put that in the chat. Any experiences or any tips you would give to other resource owners. This is a team effort, and we all need to work together. So thank you for sharing again. Thank you for being here. While the peak load, when looked at the load assessment, it's not expected to be quite as high as 48,000. It's definitely, we hit some new records last year. In great things like solar peak and peak demand for renewables, really finding lots of ways to meet that demand in the summer. One thing I particularly want to highlight, if you haven't seen already, here's a preview of the summer loads and resource assessment, which I'll show you how to find really quickly. This is also a link available in the slides if you want to visit that. Let me just switch quickly to browser, and I'll show you the front page of KISO.com right now is the very first thing, the 2025 summer assessment projects. I want to read you two specific things from that specific page, but if you want to navigate there now, go for it. All right, let me get back to full screen. The two things I want to read verbatim, just excerpts from the Summer Loads and Resources Assessment. You can read the whole thing on your own. Firstly, the analysis indicates that there are sufficient resources to meet a wide range of system conditions in load, solar, wind generation, and generation resource outages. Now, particular to weather, a few more comments in that area. The weather outlook for the months of June through August shows probability of above normal temperatures across the West, with the highest probabilistic chances across the intermountain West and slightly lower chances of above normal temperatures in coastal regions. First half of the summer should have higher magnitude of above normal temperatures, and forecasts also show an increased chance of above normal temperatures across the West in August and September 2025. There are Many interesting pieces to read through, lots of interesting sections. I highly recommend downloading a copy and have that on hand before we get into that summertime for sure. One other thing that you may want to look at, we'll have at the end of this section, specifically operational actions, is our operational guides and procedures. We'll have links to those as well. So I'll pause here just briefly. Any questions you have about going into this training or that summer loads and assessments, pause briefly, see if we can clear any of those questions early.
I'm not seeing any, Nat.
No hands. All righty. Well, here we go. Thank you, Heidi. Okay. What we'll start with, I'll look at the system. Like I said, we're going to start from the foundations. Our system is obviously there to balance supply and demand. That's our goal. The reliability of the electric system requires a constant and instantaneous match of this demand and supply. And the rhythm at which we match that is that 60 hertz. That is the frequency that we operate on. That is the tune to our song here in America. So electricity is a unique commodity because it is nearly instantaneous. It is almost the speed of light. And so for that 60 hertz, essentially, we're generating at 60 cycles per second. All of our equipment, all of our operations are to make sure we keep as close to that 60 hertz as possible. Now, maintaining this balance is, I'll use this analogy, similar to if you were driving on the highway and you activated cruise control. We want to keep you at a specific mile per hour. Let's say for this example, 60 miles an hour. That cruise control, we're trying to keep on that 60 miles per hour, 60 hertz as possible. Basically, we have to hit the gas pedal a little bit to keep us at that speed, or maybe veer off the gas pedal a little bit to keep at that speed. The idea of cruise control is that we stay in that specific range. Now, because of the instantaneous nature of our technology, of this frequency, every few seconds we are connecting and reevaluating, do we need to regulate that frequency? That's the word you'll hear most often, regulate. Now, when we forecast, whether that's specific to weather, demand, and supply, all that forecasting information, we're trying to get as clear a picture as we can before that real-time exchange of information. We have lots of optimizations performed in the market. We have lots of data collection. There are lots of different pieces of this puzzle, but the whole point is to keep us at that 60 hertz frequency. There are many players involved in this, or what we would call market participants, and that can be any entity that buys, sells, trades, transmits, distributes electricity inside of our California ISO area. This also, as you see on the slide, could extend out to other balancing authority areas. And these lines, kind of the dotted lines here, are really the lines of communication between these different entities, between the different market participants, between them and the ISO. So when people participate either in our day-ahead market and also the real-time market, this is something that the scheduling coordinator is really going to be that key player in that. Scheduling coordinators are those essentially that are certified or authorized to buy and sell power within our different markets. All of the scheduling coordinators' actions with generation, load serving entities, other balancing authorities, local utilities is all meant to maintain system reliability. First and foremost, we want the system to be reliable. And drilling down just a little bit further, the types of mechanisms, the type of phrases that you'll see connected to that, the master file is where we store all the information about the resource, all the details that we need to forecast its ability and what capacities. Bids and base schedules, we're trying to outline what's going to happen in terms of a scheduled hour-to-hour sense, or bid into the market, whether we have supply or we have demand. Now, outages, outages we're talking about when a resource cannot operate as it normally would, or cannot meet its dispatch operating target. When all of the data shows us it should be operating here, but it isn't, an outage is where you can inform us that it is not operating normally. The main piece we're going to focus on in this section, though, here at the bottom, is our dispatch and operating instructions in terms of what we want you to do to keep that 60 hertz accurate, to keep all systems running, and to make sure we have sufficient contingency or reserves should anything happen on the grid, like high temperatures in the summer, or maybe an adverse weather event. All of these different pieces in place are to make sure that we have enough and we have extra when the time comes. Now, specifically something that you will hear about if you're talking about a operating instruction. This is a very specific 3-part communication. And here's a visual example of it. I'm going to read you very specifically the legalese to make sure that each point is accurate. If you go to NERC's site, and again, you can click on this link at the top, this communication, 003-1, this is if a gen dispatcher is reaching out to you directly. Something on the system needs to change, and we're going to give you a direct instruction. The first section, in the top left, that sender will orally transmit the information that may be face-to-face, telephone, or some kind of electronic equivalent to clearly and concisely to the receiver, direct them to alter an element on the electric system. In this case, this is the ISO gen dispatcher. I need you to take whatever the unit is offline within the next 10 minutes. The response to that is the receiver orally acknowledges the communication and repeats the message back to the sender. Now, we don't need to repeat every bit of the communication verbatim, but we restate specifically that equipment-related information exactly as spoken by the sender. If there's some kind of misunderstanding or some kind of miscommunication, this is the time to ask for clarification. Third, there is another acknowledgement on behalf of the sender that the receiver did hear the information is correct, properly understood, and stating that the communication was correct. If the sender does not understand, we can then respond by saying that is wrong, something to that effect, restate the individual message, get the correction, then get to the point. We say that is correct. And as always, we're always polite on the lines. Thank you. Please and thank you are good words as well. Now, really specifically, the operating instruction, it is defined by NERC. It's a command where operating personnel in charge of that real-time operation are trying to preserve the market in some way. Whether that is changing the state, the status, the output, the input, some element is going to change to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Oops, a little too far. The three places where we might apply this regulation, where we apply these operating instructions, where we try and are basically across for us three different areas. Within our own balancing authority area, which also for us is the extended day-ahead market we're building up here. Across RC West, kind of get a map of that large-scale area all across the western United States, and our our energy imbalance market, which you kind of see as all. Man, it's moving. There's probably a little more accurate picture I could get, but this is the most up-to-date one right now. This is a lot of geography to cover. This is a lot of footprint. And again, all of this effort, all of this management, all this real-time interaction, we want to make sure everything runs smoothly all the way across. Now, I'll just give you a couple of peak stats here in this case. The peak demand let's see, as of September 6, 2022, was 52,000 megawatts. This was the highest one we ever saw. And I see a note in the chat from Paul. Please check the reference to COM0031. I believe that was a never adopted version. Oh, you're right. I believe it should have been 2 in that. That was a plain mistype. I apologize. Thank you for the clarification, Paul. It is a 2, not a 3. Oops, a little too far. Okay. Now, what happens? Moving in kind of the like I call market participants, and when we talk about markets, we're talking usually about 2 of those in particular. Day-ahead market, sometimes abbreviated as DAM, and real-time market, sometimes abbreviated as RTM. Now, briefly, the difference isn't, you see in the day-ahead market, we are not actually delivering anything, but we're trying to get as many accurate pictures of what's going to happen in the next day. So the bid submitted, the schedule submitted, we run our market optimization to try and get as much information as possible and commit as many resources prior to the day. Once we enter that real-time market, we'll go into a little more detail in another slide later on, but you see at very specific points in time, we are running market processes, we're clearing markets, we are receiving and sending dispatches, and eventually downstream, this all leads to metering and leads to a settlement, leads to a financial downstream impact. Now, move just a little bit further here. Those kind of market optimizations, the calculations that we are doing in that day-ahead time frame or that real-time time frame, you have usually specifically 2 names: security-constrained unit commitment. Where again, commitment in this context means we're choosing a resource. We're committed that resource to be available to provide the energy or capacity in that real-time market time frame. We look in that day-ahead time because we're trying to make it as easy and as cost-effective as possible. That is to minimize the startup time, minimize load costs, whatever other constraints are active at that time. Now, as you move into security-constrained economic dispatch, something happening in real time, this is a process that usually determines, we'll call it the optimal output levels. The optimal output levels for the committed generating resources to meet that system demand. And this is usually in a much smaller time frame than day ahead. This is 5 to 15 minutes, whereas day ahead is usually that 24-hour time frame ahead of time. Looking, I guess, as a milestone, moving forward in time as you go left to right, 75 minutes prior to that trade hour, we're looking at all the bids and base schedules submitted. Now, hourly, we're doing two things. We're running the hour ahead scheduling process, you'll see here in the bottom, but also something called market power mitigation. Now, if you haven't heard of this before, market power is I think of it more like influence or leverage. When demand on the power grid is very high relative to available supply, there's a significant risk that, like any business entity, a generator could recognize, I can make a lot more because this individual output is critical, and I could charge above normal prices. I kind of think of it like when there's a lot of people who want to ride at the airport or a sports game, Lyfts and Ubers are much more expensive. So an example, summer of 1999, price ranges were about 25 to 75 per megawatt hour. In the year 2000, it was $100 to $500 per megawatt hour. So market power mitigation is what we at the ISO, we take reasonable measures to mitigate such conduct that would distort competitive outcomes. We want to make it as, again, cost-effective for all involved. So the mitigation rules are triggered if the conduct of supplier is basically substantially price increases. We want to cut those out and not make that available. As you move further up in time, when you look at that 5 to 15-minute time frame, like we talked about, trying to see what units we can commit, 15 minutes ahead of that energy flow, we run another market power mitigation to make sure we have our 15-minute market runs with that real-time unit commitment. 5 minutes ahead of time, we run real-time dispatch. And as needed, you'll see on the right side, we have those contingency plans, those backups upon backups. We have those in two categories, and we'll look into those in just a moment. This real-time contingency dispatch, but also exceptional dispatch. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the tag, or I guess the subtitle for this is each transaction within the market is going to be associated with, eventually, some kind of corresponding charge code. The purpose is to maintain reliability. Every single thing we do will be accounted for, and that you'll be able to see on an invoice. Now, those backup plans, contingency dispatch, this basically is looking at if we are not able, if the normal real-time economic dispatch would not be adequate, we have the ability to intervene and produce a small 10-minute dispatch to make up for that. Exceptional dispatch as well, when we have something a situation that totally affects the system reliability or an imminent emergency, we can address that through another way. And this is usually a manual intervention as well, often called manual dispatch. Now, the main tool, I suppose you call it, the tool that you use most often is called Automated Dispatch System, or ADS, most commonly said. This is our quote-unquote cruise control. This is the system where we can manage at the 15-minute interval and the 5-minute interval, we can issue real-time dispatch instructions that happen automatically. This is especially true for the 15-minute market for multi-stage generators. These are resources that it could have up to 12 different operating configurations, or sometimes called configuration levels. This could basically change the way it reacts in terms of its PMIN or PMAX, its startup time, shutdown time, its ramp time. These are obviously different options, and so whatever the system requires, that automated dispatch system is going to find it and be able to dispatch it. Now, we started this chapter talking about operating instructions, which are usually something that will have a manual intervention, but it can be done through ADS as well. Let's see what that looks like to respond. Here's a picture of ADS. We'll start here. Let me give you just a quick walkthrough if you don't spend a lot of time in this application. Top left corner, we're looking at batch status and interval grid. This displays current alarms, current active real-time market interval, dispatch intervals. This is usually where your eyes will move first. Now moving kind of the top right of the screen, options menu and system messages grid. This is where you'll have the latest system information. Sometimes batch messages go out, system operating messages. If the generation dispatcher or real-time market operator is issuing any kind of alert, that's where it'll be up there in the top right corner. Now in the middle, I guess the main piece, your resource data grid in the front, this is the main display, which provides the resource ID, specific data, so you see all different columns, and we obviously redacted some information, but whatever your resources are, whatever your scheduling coordinator ID is, this is where you would see your data. Now, on the bottom left, trajectory point for specified resource, I have an example with some data. I'll see it a little bit later on in these slides, but this is where you're able to see where your dispatch operating point and dispatch operating targets line up in a visual sense rather than a line by line, because on the right-hand side, you've got instruction details for those specific resources where you actually see resource by resource. These are updates when new instructions arrive. You'll have a flashy red. You'll have a visual alert, but you can again see lots of different columns for dispatch operating targets. The received status row will flash yellow when it's time to accept or decline. So you'll have a lot more visual cues in that column. So the first thing of the 4 items that are our priorities for any resource to have performance expectations met, number 1. Immediately, keyword, immediately follow operating instructions when issued by the ISO. Once issued, you are on the hook for that 10-minute compliance time frame. This is not a, let me call you back. This is something we want you to do right now. If you cannot comply, no control, can't shut down, we want to find another alternative with you. We want this to be a very real-time conversation. So well, here we go. What that looks like usually, we're doing one of 2 actions. We're mitigating something or we're balancing. There is a lot of circuit mileage to cover. There are a lot of Californians who depend on what we're doing. So that communication between scheduling coordinator and us at the ISO, that is the most important. The generation dispatchers, their main focus is to maintain that reliable grid. And this includes ensuring that system operates within limitations of equipment, infrastructure, anything that needs to change. Now, these operating instructions, specifically, it's an intervention for the ISO, usually by ADS, sometimes verbally, but it is that manual intervention. I used the analogy earlier of cruise control. This would be as if you're on the highway and you're entering one of those towns that's 35 miles an hour. You have to maybe deactivate cruise control to get down to that 35, or put your foot on the brake, manually grab the wheel, whatever it is that you're doing with your vehicle. So the operating instruction is that command by the personnel to change, preserve the state, status, of output, or input. These may be, like I said, a verbal cue. This may be something received by ADS. And if you have any specific questions on this one, the tariff section 4.2.1 is where you want to look. Another name you might hear this under is reliability directive. That's one type of operating instruction, but operating instruction is what? Is, again, do this within 10 minutes. You'll see these highlighted, red, red, red. For example, the note field may say, do not exceed this dispatch operating target for whatever reason. You have that 10-minute time frame to, and then as you'll see kind of on the bottom right, we've highlighted in red that operating instruction as one of the rows there. This will pop up once per user per time horizon. So when you acknowledge that, that'll then stop, they'll go to yellow, but once per user per time horizon. Here's an example of when it doesn't go well. This is a battery-specific resource for context. This is a storage resource. So kind of orienting us here, we'll start with light blue. That's the state of charge. That's way along the top. That's less the picture, part of the picture that I want to emphasize. But then in the green, that's what the actual output was. Green was what we actually had the output. Now, dark blue, that's our dispatch operating target. The blue is where we want, dark blue is where we want to be. But as you see in red, our set points, we keep trying to pull down to that dark blue, but didn't quite get to the where we wanted to be. So this was where the agency set points were not being followed exactly, kind of all over the place. The goal, obviously, is for this to all be automatic, and that when we have AGC or automated generation control, when we have those set points, we can follow that dispatch operating target, stay on that line. But there are many reasons, for example, for batteries, there are many reasons why this doesn't happen. There could be local limits, it could be cell voltage imbalance, or a mismatch between max energy and Pmax. These things happen, but we are there to make sure that we can mitigate them, that we can balance them, that we get back to that 60 hertz. Oh, God. Oh, actually, wait, I want to make a note back here on this previous slide. I apologize. I misspoke, and I correct myself. Reliability directive will no longer be used. You're not going to hear the word directive anymore. It's called operating instruction, just as a key term. Again, correct myself. One thing I highly recommend, if you haven't already in the Automated Dispatch System, or ADS, is choosing which columns that you want to see. The 6 specific ones that if they are not visible, you want to make sure that those boxes are checked. To do so, you highlight over these check, check, check options here right above all your different tables, and making sure that operating instruction start time, operating instruction end time, operating instruction reason, operating instruction flag, follow dispatch operating target flag, and real-time supplemental energy are all set to checked. This will give you the most advanced notice, the most time to see if an operating instruction comes in. This will get you that information. If it isn't visible, it may cost us valuable seconds. So maybe the next time you log in, make sure for your user and login that these 6 different flags are set. I will pause here and see if there are any questions or clarifications. You want to revisit the operating instructions.
Looking in the chat, don't see anything, Nat, and I don't see any hands raised at this point.
All right. Thank you, Heidi. We'll keep going. And just as a reminder, go ahead and put those questions or clarifications in the chat. Again, everybody can see them, and we can move along and pause along the way. Number 2 of our priorities. Notify the ISO immediately if your resource is incapable of following your dispatch operating target. This is where we're going to start talking about outages and the importance of outage cards. Firstly, what is a dispatch operating target? I'll actually pause. I got a question in the chat. Hold on a moment. Will we be talking about rigs and how they accept ADS signals? We can, if you would like, Roger. Do you have a specific question to that end? I will go in. I'll finish up this slide, and then I want to revisit your question, Roger, as well. For dispatch operating target, what we're looking for, what Roger's asking about, how do we get those ADS signals, how do we put them into practice, and just to understand the process better and on requirements. I will go through this slide just as a brief thing, and then I will pause again. ISO folks, I will then cue you to talk a little bit more about rigs and how they accept that signal. Thank you, Roger, for asking that. When we talk about dispatch operating target, again, it's that optimal dispatch. This is what we will send and receive, send instructions via ADS. The idea is to perform as instructed. That's the phrase you'll see, perform as instructed. Now, for eligible intermittent resources, those that really can't control what they expected to produce as capable unless they receive an operating instruction. Okay, and to Roger's specific question, what I heard from my panel of experts is probably does take that one offline. Just we'll get in touch with you and understand how that works. If you have another question to that end, please put that in the chat, and we'll make sure we add that to our follow-up. But us, the ISO, we'll reach out to you directly. Here's a zoomed-in picture. I told you I had a screenshot with some data in it. This is specific to the overlap, I suppose you call it, of dispatch operating point, dispatch operating target. Now, for me, the analogy that works the best is I think of it like the path that you're on is your dispatch operating target, right? That red line is where we want you to be. We want you to follow that path. If you're hitting that on that, that's the dispatch operating target every interval, you're right where you should be on that point. Now, optimal dispatch obviously represents a single point on the trajectory. If we can hit all of those, that's exactly where we want to be. But if we need to mitigate and balance, that's what we're doing in those different intervals. We're trying to make sure we keep on that dispatch operating point trajectory. If we're using that analogy of taking a walk down the pathway, set points would be each step that we take. Every 4 seconds, we are checking in to make sure that we have the optimal output target. We may have a manual dispatch, non-economic dispatch rather, called a manual base point. And the difference between those two, there's the change in what we have optimally set by the market and what actually is manual dispatch, that's called mileage, or the difference between those two. But this AGC, as Roger mentioned in his question, automatic generation control is normally set to that signal every 4 seconds. We're setting a set point where you should be every 4 seconds. And Roger actually got a note too as well. Could you please put your email or the best email to contact you in the chat just to make sure we get in touch with you as fast as possible. Thank you. Now, one other piece of this puzzle if we have everything go perfect and everything's dispatch operating targets are met and dispatch operating points are met, then nothing happens. But we always have backups and backups. And they're basically two categories. Regulation is one category, contingency reserves is another category. Regulation is, like we talked about with 60 hertz and making sure that stays. We can regulate that up a little bit or down a little bit to make that frequency always sit where it can exactly on 60 hertz. So these are constant adjustments every 4 seconds, as we talked about in the previous one. Now, originally, when we said about contingency reserves, I was confused when I first heard what spinning and non-spinning meant. It refers to actually when we would increase or decrease the torque applied to a turbine's rotor. But today, there are lots of resources that don't have that, storage, for example. So spinning, non-spinning really just means, are you ready immediately, or do you need some time to start up? Usually that's within 10 to 30 minutes. A fast start generator could be within 10 minutes. So for contingency reserves, there's two kinds, one that's ready right now and one that's ready within a certain time frame. These reserves are there as basically product designed to ensure the reliability even if there is a grid disturbance. So for example, a large generator goes offline unexpectedly. We have extra ready to go. And in terms of spinning reserve, immediately. In terms of regulation up, regulation down, it's every 4 seconds. So we are right there following every example. Here's a bit more of a look at what we would call for an outage. Just a small snapshot on the bottom right of outage management system, and I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment. The outage management system is where if you cannot follow your dispatch operating target, what do you do? If that resource cannot physically follow its dispatch operating target, or basically the energy it was ordered for, we need you to submit an outage. And what the application's full name is WebOMS, Web Outage Management System. This should not be done for economic reasons. This is a physical limitation reason. This is, we want to have as much information as possible to see, is this going to be a long or serious outage? So for each of these, we'll basically put our outages into two categories. This can be for generation. This could also be for transmission. Outages are submitted sometimes for obviously planned maintenance, but sometimes they happen without our knowledge. Think of planned outages. There's, going to your annual physical for us humans. There are obviously routine maintenance we need to do, but a forced outage would be an unplanned thing. We broke our arm and have to go to urgent care. Usually the time frame threshold is for an outage. Anything greater than 8 days is considered a planned outage. Anything under that 8 days we'll consider a forced outage. The reason we need all this information for WebOMS is we need to update master file. You see it there on the left-hand side. We need to know what actually can be done by that resource. We don't want to make things worse by guessing. So actually knowing those limits, knowing that schedule, knowing when that resource will be available, that's what OMS is there to help inform. Now, let me give you a better screenshot. I know it's a little small, I apologize. But what we have here is the outage card, I guess we'll call it. The information that we want starts with scheduling coordinator ID, which resource is it, and I've highlighted here the nature of work. Nature of work is one of the most important fields and actually drives and streamlines the outage submission process and can shorten the processing time. It helps us capture relevant data quicker. It can increase the consistency. And I have a question here. I'll pause just for a moment. A question from Al. Where is that 8 days coming from? Is the standard 21 days? I have only heard of the 8 days specifically, but I saw folks, do you know if there's another standard, perhaps 21? Let's see. Let me also, I'm going to promote some of my ISO folks to be co-hosts as well so they don't have to raise their hands. Let's see. We'll add a couple people in here. Oh, here we go. Oh, Craig, I'm going to get you as well. Anyone know of a 21-day standard or something different than that?
Nat, can you go ahead and repeat what the 8 and 21 day is in relation to? I think some folks were listening in part and not in full, or maybe whoever raised their hand can also raise their hand and be unmuted. Either way, I think we just need a restating of our question.
Sure, yeah. Al, you asked the question. I will read out your question again, but I unmuted you if you would like to speak as well. When we talk about a planned or forced outage, the 8 days is the threshold typically. And Al was clarifying, is the standard 21 days, or where did that 8 days come from? Oh, they typed your name wrong. Oh, boy. It's Ali. It's not. Okay, it's not that one. Sorry. It looks like the name was incorrect. But let me unmute your line just to make sure, if you would like.
I think we got it, and I think we can point folks. Sorry, this is Heather Curley, Senior Counsel to CAISO. I think we can. I don't think we need to get into the details now, but Ali, you can always follow up with us. But I believe you will find your answer in both our tariff and our definition of forced outage by days, as well as the BPM, which provides further detail.
Thank you, Heather. And if you have follow-up questions too, please put those in the chat. We'll add those in. Oops. Now, like I was talking about nature of work, that's the specific way we can streamline the process. There's a lot of ways that we can essentially categorize the outages into 2 categories. And there's the 2 different acronyms for this. There's a final approval required, or an FAR outage. There's also a final approval not required, which is FAN. For those that final approval are not required, there's a way we can more quickly get back in response to that outage submission. Also, these nature of work categories will provide downstream systems with structured data. It's necessary that all that outage processing, so we can facilitate, hopefully, automation. Even things like nature of work category can affect if an outage derate for maybe a resource adequacy resource, will that be subject to RAIN, or resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism? For more details on that, that's in the tariff section 40.9, that is 40.9. But that is many of the outcomes that can occur from the state of work, or sorry, nature of work. Now, I know it says on the right, short description, but I really think we should white label that to be as detailed as possible, detailed description. As much information as we can have about the state of that resource, that will help us plan better. Obviously, every field is important, but I hope it doesn't say, test outage. This is what we did for this example. That's way too short. We want to do more. So when entering your outage cards, this is not just jotting down, yep, it's going to be off from this time to this time. It is very important to know those start and end times, but what is going on? Is this scheduled maintenance? How many days in advance? Is this available at another time? Any of that information would help us. Now for outages, again, we have a slightly different set of things in the day-ahead market, slightly different set of rules in the real-time market. Really for outages, it all depends on that end time. As you see on the left, for outages in the day-ahead time frame, the market, we add that startup time to the end of the outage before awarding the unit. So we know it's fully ready to go. We have that foresight ahead of time. But in the real-time time frame, we assume the startup time is part of the outage. So as an example, if an outage is set to end at 6:59 a.m. and we want to actually get into the hour ending 8, so for 7 a.m., we could, if the startup time and it is active, we could actually use that 7 to 8 a.m. time frame. But if it's still starting up, it wouldn't be able to use that. So most importantly, if you're entering an outage in real time, build that startup time into the outage rather than expect it to be accounted for. That would only happen day ahead. We'll pause here again. Any questions on the first 2 items, operating instructions, or if you're unable to follow the dispatch operating target, you need to submit an outage. All right, not seeing any hands, not seeing any piece in the chat, but please keep doing so. And again, we can get back to you hopefully in line in the chat if possible. One answer I did get from Brian. Thank you, Brian. Our own esteemed Brian Stockwell. 8 days is coming from the outage management, BPM. So if you're looking in that business practice manual for outage management, a short-range outage planning is on page 13 to 14. Excellent research, Brian. Thank you very much. And Heidi put that information in the chat as well if you want to follow that and follow up. We'll go into chapter 3 of our priorities. Ramp linearly to follow dispatch operating points mid-interval to mid-interval. Linearly is very much the point. And, let me go on to my next slide real quick. This is the picture that I think everybody maybe has seen if you've been working in research for a while. But the first time I saw this, I thought of high school math. I thought of, okay, the slope of the line should be smooth. There should be no stepping, as we would call it. So stepping like a set of stairs, we don't want to go way up and then way over. The set point will increment linearly from starting point to target at an agreed upon ramp rate. We want it to be a smooth slope of a line. And every 4 seconds, like we talked about, we take another step down that path, every set point, every 4 seconds from start to finish of that ramp. Successfully there. This is a test, so this is immediately going to go back down. Resources then expected to respond linearly as instructions are received. So for this test, we have it power back down every 4 seconds, step correctly, and a smooth down to 0 again. Now, this is the perfect one because this is a test, but the whole idea behind all of these dispatch operating targets and set points, this is the trajectory data, the resources expected to respond linearly in all of these cases. Now, same thing applies for batteries. We'll chop a left down battery lane here a little bit. It's slightly different terms, and I'll explain some of those key terms, but the same principle applies. We want to ramp linearly at an agreed upon ramp rate. Batteries have the ability to go from 0 to 250 in this case, 250 megawatts instantaneously. That is not a linear ramp. That is not an agreed upon ramp rate. That is probably way too much and will overshock the system. So it's important to ramp linearly, especially for batteries, because they're unique. So you can basically flip a switch and go from 0 to all it is. Here's an example. This 250 megawatt resource, right? In that impact area, the average megawattage for, let's say, the city of San Francisco is 300 to 600 megawatts. So this is almost a city-sized amount of power. This would shock the system and not something that we want to have happen. So the linear ramp rate is very important in this case as well. Some other key terms you might run into as we talk about ramping and operation for batteries. First one is PFR, or primary frequency response. This is the control mode we want to use instead of AGC. I'll talk about that more on the next slide. PFR helps us detect changes in frequency and arrest them earlier, stop them, intervene. And the two ways you might see that or measure that is in terms of its droop and its deadband. Droop is usually expressed as a percentage, and usually in this case, a 5% droop would be 5% of 60 is 3 hertz. And this is really, it's where do we need to start acting? If we're outside of that droop range, we want to fix something. And this is where usually, in this example, there's a generator output that's proportional to that droop. So, for example, if there's a drop from 60 hertz to 57 hertz, this is an extreme example, 5% change. There's a hydro generator at 0 load currently, and a governor set at 5% droop. So that would respond from fully closed to fully open and help correct and arrest that change in frequency. Deadband, I know it sounds bad, but it's like the safe zone. That 0.036 hertz, that's the nominal frequency. If we go outside of that range, plus or minus, maybe we're at 0.04, that's where we'll, again, need to apply primary frequency response to correct that frequency. Let me give you a look here, more visual. Usually, like I mentioned, we're using automatic generation control as the primary mode for a lot of facilities. PFR is what we want it to be for specifically storage resources. That should be the primary control mode. Now, this switch helps. It obviously, the whole idea is to arrest that frequency before it gets out of line. You'll just see on the side some data graphs showing it's much more effective with PFR. We have a much better result if that's the primary control mode versus the secondary. A couple of the things specific to batteries. You might have heard of state of charge. That is, what percentage do we have left of our charge or discharge? Now, when we are calling upon these kinds of resources, when we're committing these resources, for day-ahead markets, they could be in 2 different ways. They could be just there for regulation, that is, keeping that frequency aligned. That's usually called regulation energy management, or REM. We'll keep that state of charge at 50% so we could equally move upward or downward. We have the mobility to be flexible, whatever the system needs. Now, non-regulation energy management means can be part of regulation, but also you probably have bids across that 24-hour period. So we make sure you have enough state of charge to meet your existing schedule, if that's the case. Of course, we optimize. Of course, we look every 15 and 5 minutes, but we want to make sure that you can completely have enough state of charge for your entire schedule. Now, the real-time market, we have telemetry, we have data, we are measuring actively. So we, again, receive state of charge and we're able to support whatever that resource needs across its whole day. Similar to we talked about earlier, spinning and non-spinning, contingency reserves, same kind of things apply for batteries. It's just slightly different. You'll see that key term 30 minutes is there allowed. We want to make sure we have 30 minutes of state of charge reserved. We want to keep that available, whether that's 15-minute market or real-time dispatch, if we're involved in regulation, but then also for self-schedules, again, making sure you meet whatever you have scheduled across that 24-hour period. Before we move on to the last one, what questions do we have either on operating instructions, dispatch operating targets, outages, or maybe perhaps something specific to storage resources?
Looking, I don't see any questions, and I don't see any hands raised at this time, but we'll keep an eye out for any questions that might come in.
Right. And Heidi, thank you so much. You're doing a great job in the chat for following up with all of these. I really appreciate it. So yeah, everybody, please put things in the chat. We've got a great turnaround time if you have one question along the way. So number 4, we'll follow dispatch operating targets and operating instructions accurately. But what if you don't? What if this doesn't happen? What are the consequences? Before we get there, we have lots of guardrails, lots of bumper bowling lanes in place to make sure that we never have to get to this point. We have our requirements. These are federal and regulatory standards that we all operate within. We have stakeholder guides for you. Like we said, we've been referencing the tariff, business practice manuals. We have lots of documentation to support what to do and also how to do it, step by step, operating procedures and job aids. I have many of them linked at the end of this section. We want to make sure you know what to do, and that's why we're here today. This is what training is for. We are unsure, and we ask questions, and we test things out here so that we don't have to be unsure out there. You know, summer's the time when the grid is definitely stressed, yes. But when we humans, when we get stressed, we do what we've trained to do. We do what we've researched well multiple times. We don't do well. We're like, oh, let me look that up in the tariff during this crisis mode. So that's why we train so often. That's why we do lots of summer readiness activities just like this one. Now, there's 4 categories really we're looking for if there is a resource performance issue identified. It usually has to do with one of these 4 things. This is, if one of these is found to be the case, we want to notify that scheduling coordinator via email. We want to demonstrate, we wanted this performance expected. Here's what happened. Here's why. Then that scheduling coordinator will coordinate with their resource owners, their desks, making sure what happened, what are the corrective actions being taken. Usually it has to do with one of these 4 things, right? We didn't follow the dispatch operating target. That's why we mentioned it so many times. We failed to ramp in a linear manner. Like we talked about, we have a stepping ramp rather than a smooth line. Third, we could see we failed to transition correctly between automated generation control to the dispatch operating target. Basically, we missed the mark. We missed that signpost. If we're on that path, DOTs will be the signposts, and we missed one. Or we just aren't following AGC. We aren't connected to that 4-second check-in to make sure that we can regulate. If one of these 4 occurs, we want to obviously make sure it can be corrected. If non-response, if nobody responds to that email to the scheduling coordinator, there could be possible financial consequences in settlements. There could be contractual consequences from regulators, or possibly referred to either our Department of Market Monitoring or to that federal or regional level. We don't want to have to do these things. I'm sure Heather would agree with me. There's not the things we want to have to take action on, but these are the possible consequences should we get non-response. There's a very helpful, not just visual, but really a hub of all the information that you could possibly need, whether you are brand new as a resource operator owner or you doing it a long time. I'm going to click this one just to show you a quick preview, and we'll put this in the chat. This is a visual walkthrough, links to lots of training documents, links to those tariff and BPMs. Let me just put this quick in the chat if you're able to see it. Very effective and a great thing worth bookmarking. Or if you're newer to the ISO, a great thing to have available as you're rolling on onboard. If I were to sum up in one slide all the things that we want to highlight for summer readiness, to make it a smooth and calm summer, we want to communicate. This is between our scheduling coordinators, our resource operators, that we all have control. That is always the goal. Reliability first and foremost. Respond to those operating instructions within time parameters. Like we showed in the example, that 3-part communication, we will tell you what to do and within what time. That is what the tariff asks of us, and that's what we're asking of you. If you have to submit an outage to reflect those physical limitations, make sure it is detailed, as much information as you can provide. We want to ensure that we are testing regularly and able to confirm that resource performance, like you saw with that test example with linear ramping. That makes sure that we can hit the mark exactly right for that set points. We want to channel the words of Bruce Lee, be ready, not tense. If we've trained to do it, if we know about our emergency notifications, if we know what to do in operational mode, we're ready to go. And the next section of training, we'll talk more in detail about those notifications and those communication protocols. Making sure everything is up to date in master file. As soon as you know a limitation or there's an outage, that information we want to have up to date. Like I said, we don't want to make things worse by guessing. We want to know exactly what that resource can do. Actively monitoring your resources, make sure you have control, and if anything does seem suspicious, we want to obviously have the ability to report that, get ahead of that problem, mitigate it before it becomes anything major. So I'll pause here. Before we go into a different section talking about emergencies, or talking about how to communicate during those energy emergencies, what questions can we answer about any operating instructions, dispatch operating targets, outages, or anything similar?
I have a quiet group today. No questions in the chat at this point, and
okay.
No raised hands.
Sounds good. Thank you, Heidi. All right. Picture for a moment you looking at either your phone app or weather on the news, and usually we'll give you some kind of 7-day outlook, right? Like out in California, they're going to have some warm weather tomorrow, high winds and some very overpriced real estate. This is basically what we are trying to do with our 7-day resource adequacy trend. I'm going to switch to a live version of the website as well. If you scroll down, like I said, the top thing on kaiso.com right now is the 2025 summer assessment. Right below that is this very handy page called View Today's Outlook. Now, there's lots of data on this page, really valuable stuff, but one I'm focused on specifically is the 7-day resource adequacy trend. This is what we're trying to do. Similar to the Weather Service, we are trying to forecast as much information as we can. This is about resource adequacy. This is about demand, supply. Like I said, there's lots of different pieces of data, but this live interactive map really can help you predict things in the future too. This is downloadable if you want to look at it in Excel, if you prefer that. It's a very valuable chart to start with. And we're trying to get ahead and forecast everything we can before. Oops. I'm going to go through a bunch more slides. I jumped to the end here. But when we're looking at that forecast, we're trying to find, will there be high temperatures? Will there be a weather event? Will there be a shortage of some kind? Will there be a transmission line down? Whatever it is, if we can find out early, that's when we want to find it out. So in that maybe 4 to 7 days out time period, as far ahead as we can, we're trying to forecast and see, do we have resource adequacy? Are there any existing system conditions that could affect? Is there inclement weather expected? Do we have any impact to the grid? And what can we do next? In terms of what we can do, we'll come back to this style slide, and each one of these different time frames, we might coordinate with some folks on the left-hand side, or we might issue some communications to the public. On the left here, operational coordination. We are working with our utilities, our neighboring balancing authorities. Perhaps there's, ELRP board, RC West, maybe the governor's office, whatever we in California need to do to make sure we are, ready, and do we need any kind of assistance from others? We're going to be doing a lot of communication. Now, second, kind of the Public and customer communications, the ways that you are likely to interact or hear about, you might be on the mobile app, you might get emails, you might be looking at news releases, our daily briefing. There's lots of places you might see this, even social media channels. And when we issue either, or we'll cover in a moment, flex alerts or energy emergency alerts, these we will issue, and we'll also issue the de-escalations through these channels as well. You can check Kaiser.com, Kaiser Social Media. We're going to use what we call an omni-channel solution to communicate as much as we can. Now, when we move forward in time, we know a little bit more. We got a little better picture of the weather, a little better picture of system conditions, much better picture probably of those factors that might impact the grid. We might, again, coordinate with other agencies. This could be maybe water, this could be, regulatory agencies, anybody that is involved with, we're expecting to have a very hot week. We want to be able to have everything lined up, communication plan, operational plan, so that we don't jump and have the wrong information go out or have the wrong alert before we actually need to. This 1 day out time frame will finally be able to tell, I think, a lot more accurately each of these different categories: system conditions, resource adequacy, weather, etc. You'll find this a very similar action. We're trying to always communicate, always give people accurate information so that we all have as much time as possible to react. Now, on the operating day, we can't predict everything. We're not perfect. We're getting pretty good at it, but we can't predict everything. This is where we may take actions in accordance with our operating procedures. Now, the last slide of this section here, I'm going to have many of those links to you. The main one we'll probably talk about in this case is 4420. Now, when we talk about issuing alerts, this is a standard that we use as the EEA, Energy Emergency Alert System. And here's my kind of fun way to illustrate it. This, if you've never been before, is the world's tallest thermometer out in Baker, California. If you're ever driving in the high desert, definitely worth a stop, definitely worth a picture to send to friends and family. Last time my dad and I were here, we saw that at 119 degrees. It was a hot day. But really, the escalating nature of an energy emergency alert is not dependent on a temperature. Let's be very specific. It's not based on heat, although that's usually one of the inputs. With a flex alert, what we're trying to do is we're trying to incentivize people to conserve energy. All of us who conserve energy at home, businesses, everybody who consumes energy. We want to incentivize people to turn off some TVs, or maybe if you don't need to, don't run those. We also see commonly, if we're at a point where it's really going to be really hot, there's going to be a high wind, there's a fire, there's something affecting the grid, we may want to delay maintenance if possible. So restricted maintenance operations, we're trying to, if possible, postpone so we have every resource available during that tight time frame, where we don't have quite as much, we'd rather have that resource available than offline. Now, a transmission emergency, that's kind of TE. This could be localized, and typically is. This could be a system-wide transmission issue, but I'll give you a visual in a couple slides. Most often, this is not system-wide. Energy emergency alerts are system-wide. We are all interconnected, and we all have to work together to keep our system up. We will, if we notice a shortage in the day ahead time frame, we'll issue an EEA watch. One really difference between that and EEA1 is that real-time time frame. If we see that supply tight, EEA2, we may start to implement those load reduction programs or implement some of those operational plans. Now, EEA3, very specifically, there's two iterations. There's a step one, step two. EEA3 we'll call prepare for possible rotating outages, and that's what it will say in social media there as well. Now, EEA3, firm load interruption, that is the actual activation of the plan to interrupt firm load. In social media, it will be called ordering rotating outages. Now, the visual I always thought of is, in the movie where they're going to activate whatever device and they turn the key and the red light turns on and then they hold their finger over it. Bah, we're not going to hit the, but that's what EEA3 is going to be. So EEA3 is where we're priming for firm load interruption. EEA3 firm load interruptions, we're activating that plan. Actually, one thing I want to switch. I put these in the wrong order. Flex should be above RMO. Flex alert should be something a little bit higher. But I wanted to clarify that before we moved on. I didn't have these in the right order. Now, usually what we're responding to is what we'll usually refer to as a heat event. Typically, these are some of the criteria that could be involved. It could be that our 7-day outlook, like I said, that forecast could be indicating record high temperatures, or as you might hear it, above normal, above average temperatures. If we, in our balancing authority, we have a peak load forecast above 50,000 megawatts. If we see that we're below in capacity, we could consider this a heat event. Now, let me give you one specific one. I pulled this from a really valuable discussion of the weekend of 2022 and Labor Day. This is specifically on September 6th. We had to use a lot of the energy emergency alerts, and as a note, these could be, many could be active at once. It's not just a rolling system. So you see we went actually up to the point where in that real-time time frame, we had shortage, we had tightened capacity. So now we did what we could, things got better in September, but we got all the way up to an EEA3, and this was a scary time. You see here on the side, this was a dicey hour or so. In 4 p.m., we put in a flex alert. We got a little bit of system response. You see a little bit of a dip there. We did demand response at around 5 p.m. That was dispatched, a little bit of a dip. We declared our EEA3, and then text went out to say, hey, everyone lower. And see, we went way down and had to catch up a bit. This was not ideal, but it does happen. The idea is that we can exercise and solve the problem without having to get to EEA3. Now, if you want to get a look at all of these, on that same page I was showing you earlier, today's Outlook, there's a really handy PDF, which is shown here on the left side. If you want any more details or want to link out to see any other websites, for example, Flex Alert. Now, I highly recommend, too, the mobile application. It's available on both Google Play Store, App Store, because you can, as you see here, toggle under notification settings, emergency notifications. Most of us have our phone with us at all times. Very valuable to get that KAISO app on your phone so you're able to see it, hopefully, wherever you are with your phone with you. No need to go and sit down on the laptop. So for Flex Alert, what are we doing? Well, we're trying to incentivize people to not use as much. This usually is response to some kind of ongoing grid issue, some kind of variable like forecast. It could even be a big enough cloud that could cost us hundreds of megawatts. So this is a public awareness. We want to have people voluntarily turn things off, not use as much. Like I said, I have these backwards, I apologize. Usually what we're going to try and do is restrict maintenance operations because that's much easier to get ahead of, doesn't require public outreach. But if we can, we want to reschedule those outages, change those start and end dates so we're not having that happen during a system constricted time. Like I said, we try and do this a day ahead of time, hopefully further out if possible. Now, transmission emergency, like I said, these could be system-wide, could be local. This usually requires some kind of additional bidding, incremental dispatch, maybe emergency assistance, but we want to rectify that and mitigate that. Just to give you a visual scale, like I said, EEAs, Flex Alerts, where you talk about the whole bulk system, everyone's in it together. Transmission emergencies might be affected to that, but it might be only a particular location, depending on what's going on. Now, when we get to EEA watch, like I said, this is a day ahead time frame. We're forecasting that one or more of the hours in our schedule for the next day is not going to be where it needs to be. So all the available generation is projected to be in use. We need additional bids. We need to make incremental dispatch. We try and let everybody know about 3 o'clock the previous day. If we go up to EA1, still in real time, we have all available generation projected to be in use, and we still don't see that we have enough contingency. We might be prepared to use load management programs. We try and give you hours ahead notice as well. For EA2, we have these tough constraints. All available resources are expected to be in use, and we cannot meet what we think is going to be our maybe next hour, maybe next couple hours. So we're still trying to maintain contingency reserves, but in the current or next hour, and we are going to be in trouble if we don't act now. That's why for EEA3, again, it's a two-step process. The first step being EEA3, prepare for potential rotating outages. We are unable to maintain that contingency reserves, and we need to, it's imminent that we need to interrupt. But it is then second step two. A little bit of clarity here. I highlighted very much in orange. When you see EEA3, prepare for possible rotating outages, this is not an instruction to interrupt firm load. This is, again, priming. We're stating we will be preparing for rotating outages. This is not something that we want you to take action on. It's awareness, and should we have to take action, we'll issue that second step, which is firm load interruption. And just as you see in social media, it's called something slightly different, ordering rotating outages. We're trying to get back to the point where we can have contingency reserves. If not, we have to manually shed load. And this is done what we call pro rata, which is in proportion. And you'll see this is the column right here, the pro rata share. Very specific organizations are called upon to be part of this firm load rotation. We're not expecting one person to do all of it, but we do by a percentage. Have to shed that load by proportion. Now, the last, hopefully, soon step of this process is when we go back to EEA 0. That's the goal, back to normal. So if we had to get all the way up to EEA 3, if firm shed loads were required, we're going to restore that as soon as possible. We will then downgrade. You will see EEA 3 down to EEA 2, down to EEA 1, down to EEA Watch, and hopefully by the end, we have continued updates until we can issue a EEA 0 all clear, at which point we will cancel those emergency notices, or if one was active, when its end time hits, it will be canceled as well. Now, I apologize, you're going to have to tilt your head to the left here for this graph, but this is a visual display of how could you hear about each of these different communication methods for each of these emergency alerts. So for restricted maintenance operations, we'll either get that through grid management system or through our various channels, Flex Alert, Day Ahead, EA1, EA2, EA3, all of those. You see, we're going to use as many of these as we possibly can, but you will get, and when we get back to all clear, you'll get a customer service email, you'll get a notice, you'll get a GMS notice, what we want to tell everybody that we're all back to normal. Now, if you would like to subscribe to these and are not already, I'm going to show you exactly what you can do there, and I'll put this in the chat as well. It is simply a first name, last name, email address. If you'd like to give your organization, hit submit. Then just make sure that your organization doesn't have any kind of blacklisting of our email domain, which is Kaiser Communications, so that you don't miss that message. If you ever need to unsubscribe for some reason, you simply go down to the bottom of these emails, click unsubscribe, just like any other email system, but it is all self-service. You can jump right in. I'll put this link in the chat. And if you want to make sure you are signed up, this would be a great time. Right. Like I mentioned, there are many documents that can support you. We have lots more that we have to offer you. If you're going to look at one at the end of this, I highly recommend reading through 4420, System Emergency. But whether you are, working for whatever type of resource, whatever type of question you have, you can start here at just our operating procedures default page. If you have a specific question about any of these, let us know. I have one specific question in the chat as well from Ben. Could you briefly address how the KISO EEAs may or may not overlap with notices from RC West? That's a great question, Ben. That sounds like if there's any historical examples of that. ISO folks, do you have any examples or comments in that area?
This is Heather. I'll take the first crack. This may be worth a follow-up, just because I don't think we've been asked this question before, so I'm not sure we have everyone on the phone for it. But the KISO is, a reliability coordinator for multiple balancing authorities. That is a separate service than we offer running our markets. So each balancing authority that is part of our RC system can ask the RC to issue an EEA notice on its behalf. There is a sign-up process for the RC West notifications, and I'm not sure if that's the same sign-up process linked in the chat. But those notifications when they go out should indicate the balancing authority for which they're applicable, meaning that, so I'm just going to pull some balancing authority areas out of the hat. Let us say Puget Sound Energy issued an EEA2. The notification should specify that that's for Puget Sound Energy. But let's say on that same day, KISO has issued an EEA1 and Bank has issued an EEA Watch. All those should be going out through the RC West system. But again, I believe they specify the balancing authority. So any other KISO folks on the phone want to clarify how folks are receiving those notifications? And so they don't, there's no overlap confusion.
What I did find here also, I have the link for folks if you would like to subscribe to RC West. From the knowledge that we have, this should not be an overlap, but there is a very specific link for RC West. There should not be an overlap, but there are two different places to sign up if you would like. Both are in the chat now.
And I'm sorry I missed the question, Aster, but if you follow up with us, that would be great. Just based on what you heard, you might have further questions, and I think then we'll get out a more formal answer to that. I think it was a great question and appreciate you asking.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Any other questions before we go into our last slide?
Be issuing notices for other BAs at the same time as for our BA. So it's not directly overlap with us, but there could be RC West notices for other entities.
Thanks, Craig. And so, right. So I think, yeah, we're just confirming that you could be getting both an RC West notification and a KISO notification for different balancing authority areas. And so to read those, and they should have the distinguishing information in them.
Well, let's open it up as well. These are, again, great questions. I had AI draw a picture. I said, what would summer readiness look like in the energy industry? And I think it did pretty well. I think it's pretty good. So with this entertaining photo as our backdrop, what other questions can we answer? This is the time to be unsure. This is the time to ask and clarify. I think we smooth over a lot of different questions. What else can we clarify for you before we stop?
Not seeing any hands, not seeing any questions quite yet. Oh, never mind. There's one that just came in the chat.
Oh, from Ben again. Hi, Ben. Thank you. Yes, are glad to put this on and we'll continue to do so. Will there be recording? Yes, both the recording and this slideshow. So you can click on all the links. Will be available on KISO.com. We'll get that up as soon as we can. Usually it's within 3 business days, but we'll get right on that. You can feel free to share that with your teams. If you have follow-ups, you can reach out to us as well. Just, hey, I have a next question after training. Once you're reviewing the video or have another question about documents or something. What other questions do you have from the group? All right. Well, we will stick around in the lobby if you have other questions. But like I mentioned, if you want to go to KISO.com, we'll have all the resources available there. You can write to us at customerreadiness@KISO with any follow-up questions. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention. I wish you all a cool and smooth summer, and we'll see you next time.